so the big thing is, relationships matter. And so when you're really good at relationships, it helps when you are out on your own, because that's one of the things that I think a lot of accountants struggle with, is the business development aspect of things.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life in Accounting. We are a podcast production of whereaccountantsgo.com. I'm Mark Goldman, the CPA, and your host for this podcast. We are a show that's all about accounting careers and the many facets of a career involving accounting. And I say involving accounting because we really do try to showcase all the different things you can do with a background in accounting, as well as what it takes to start and continue to build your career. Well, our guest for this week is Don Maranca. And if you've been a listener with us for a while, then you may recognize that name. This is our first follow-up episode, and Don was our absolute first guest on the show. Literally guest number one. This episode's going to be a little different since it's a follow-up show. I invited Don back, hoping to get an update on his business, as well as to go deeper into some of the topics we discussed the first time. And I wasn't disappointed. If you're thinking of starting your own business endeavor of some kind, either part-time or full-time at some point, this is going to be a great episode. Don works with business owners on systemizing and growing their businesses, and he shares a lot of insight that people just starting a business don't necessarily know, or at least have to learn the hard way. This really is a valuable discussion, and I encourage you, if you do find value in this, to go back to episode number 1 and listen to that as well, so you can get the full story on Don's career and what he does for a living. If you do find value in this episode, please check us out online also. You can find us at whereaccountantsgo.com. We have all kinds of audio and written accounting career-focused materials. If you happen to be an employer, or maybe you're starting your own thing and you're going to be employing people, one publication that may interest you is titled Hiring for Accounting, a comprehensive guide to filling accounting positions. It's a 45-page ebook that we have available to you on our website that covers everything you need to know to successfully and efficiently fill accounting positions. You can find it at whereaccountantsgo.com, and once again, it's titled Hiring for Accounting. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Here's Don Maranca. Well, hello, Don. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mark. Man, it's been a while since we did the first one, so I'm very honored and privileged to have you invite me back, so thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I feel the same way. This is going to be exciting. For the audience, this is a first for us. To date, we have never had the same guest on the show twice. But I've been thinking about that for a while, and I wanted to get a few updates from a few of our guests based on what they were doing when we originally recorded. And frankly, for many of the episodes, there's definitely been a few items that we could have went into deeper or discussed further. So this is going to be our first repeat guest episode. And for the first one, I chose to invite Don Maranca back because Don was actually guest number 1, episode number 1. It's hard to believe. That was back in 2016.
Wow.
It's been a long time. Been a long time. Well, Don, we're going to handle this a little differently than the rest because obviously, we've got the original episode sitting out there, and hopefully, we can get into a lot more depth this way. To start, though, I think 2016 was a long time ago. I think it would be good for the audience if we could get, sort of a recap or summary of your accounting background. Give us a quick snapshot, and then we can get into the deeper stuff about developing business and that kind of thing. What was your early accounting career like?
Sure. So I started out in public accounting after graduating at UT with an MPA. So I went through their 5-year master's program there, and then I ended up at Arthur Andersen in Dallas. And I stayed in public accounting for 5 years, a combination of Arthur Andersen and also Maxwell Lock and Ritter in Austin after Andersen. And that's where I got more into consulting. So I was in audit in Andersen and then audit and consulting at Maxwell Lock and Ritter. And then from there, I left public accounting and I did my stint in public companies and also private companies. So before I decided to take the entrepreneurial leap and start my own business.
Public and private. That's right. You were with Dell for a while, right?
Yeah, I was at Dell Computers and Applied Materials. So at Dell, I was a senior finance analyst, and then at Applied Materials, I was more into an operational role. So that's kind of where I got my toe in both finance and operations. So when I went into private companies, I wore the hats of CFO, COO roles.
Okay. When you decided to take the big leap and become an entrepreneur, I'm trying to remember, did you originally start out with, sort of an outsourced CFO service, or did you jump right into the business consulting? I don't remember how that went.
No, well, actually, in between Dell and Applied, I had a stint of a couple years with starting my first business, which is when I was completely, burned out from the corporate world, and I started an event management company, which is completely unrelated to my training, but I wanted to do executive retreats and employee events to really help build leadership and also foster relationships with employees, and the whole point of retention and employee development. And I did that for a couple of years before the dot-com burst. So that was my first entrepreneurial leap. And then the second one was when I started JDSM in 2009. That's when I bought the franchise called the Alternative Board. And I went straight into the Tab franchise, if you will. So I didn't start as an outsourced CFO. That was one of the things I wanted to do to help complement the Tab business, but it really never took off. I did some side projects on that, but not really a big component of my services.
Okay. Now, see, we're going to have a third episode because I forgot about the event management business. And there's a whole story in here about, if at first you don't succeed, don't give up,
Absolutely. And I think that's pretty clear in entrepreneurial lives. So,
wow. I totally forgot about that. Okay. So how does your business differ today versus when we originally recorded the first episode? What's happened with you in the last?
Really, a lot has happened because in 2016, that's when, actually 2015 is when I decided to pivot my business a little bit and add a new offering. And so since then, which is EOS, for those that may not know, Tab, the Alternative Board, is a franchise, and I do peer advisory boards and coaching. So it's like CEO roundtables and one-on-one coaching as well. And it's strictly for the business owner. And when I decided to become an EOS implementer, the Entrepreneur Operating System implementer, that was back in 2015 is when I went through the formal training, August of 2015. And then you interviewed me in 2016. And so I was just getting into the EOS space. And so my product mix was just starting to evolve at that point in time. So since then, Tab has been really steady and having some minimal growth, but really steady and strong. And EOS was the one that's really starting to grow at that point in time when we spoke. And since then, I would say, when I look at the numbers from 2016 to 2018, my EOS side of the business grew 250%. And from last year to what I expect to have this year, it'll probably be about a 66% growth. So it's changed a lot, actually, since we last spoke.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that growth was continuing. That's amazing.
Yeah, when you consider the mix of the change, because I think that's one of your questions, was a mix change. So in 16, when you look at my overall revenues, it was probably 75% Tab and 25% EOS. In 2019, by the time we end this year, it'll probably be flipped. So it'll be 25% Tab and 75% EOS. It's a pretty drastic change. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's not that you've decreased the Tab part. It's just that EOS has grown so substantially.
It's just that side of my business has just really grown.
Yeah, actually, there's probably a good discussion in here as well. Later on, I wanted to get into about starting businesses and what new business owners need to know and that kind of thing. But there's a good discussion in here about how you manage switching your product mix and not losing the original. What have you had to do, like in the delegation area, to be able to maintain that?
Yeah, I'm practicing what I preach now because that's one of the things that, working with my clients, I have to work with them on the delegation aspect of things in order for them to grow other sides of their business. And that's definitely been a challenge, but it's been great because I've had to really lead some other folks to take parts of my business and take comfort in that they're doing the right things and checking with them. And they're doing it great. And I've actually added some other folks just recently here, which we can probably get into a little bit more.
Okay.
If we need to.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because that's something I've seen with accounting firms is that, you start out because you're a great technician and, you enjoy taking care of customers, but eventually you get to the point where with a lot of accountants, it's hard to let go of doing the work, so that they can continue to grow and, delegate that to other people. And is that something that's always just been easier for you, or have you had to develop that skill over time?
I don't know if it's been easy. I mean, I've done it over my career, but since I started the business, I haven't had to do it as much since we last spoke in 2016. So because my business has grown so much that I've had to do it. So it's really going back to what I did before, and also going back to what I do preach to my clients. So it's been challenging, but it's been fun. And I know it's necessary for me to serve more clients in different ways in order for the business to grow.
Okay. How many additional, team members have you added?
So since 16, I think I was in the process of transitioning one of my groups to another facilitator. And since then, because I operate 3 groups, and since then I've transitioned another one to another facilitator, and I've added, my wife actually joined the business in August of last year, because I was running at my capacity and I needed some help really on the business side of things. And then we're finding out that she's actually could be a practitioner as well, because of what she's done in her past career in helping grow businesses. She could be a TAP facilitator or an EOS implementer as well. And so we're entertaining those thoughts. And then we've also added another a business development person, because as I mentioned before, my TAP business has remained strong, but it hasn't really grown much, and I want to re-energize that. And the biz dev person is going to focus on that part of my business.
Okay. You're making a lot of investments.
I am.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's nice that people are actually referring me. I've gotten to the point now where I feel like, people are referring to me and the business is coming to me, and it's hard for me to say no. So I want to be able to serve them, and I can't do it all myself.
Okay. So you work with your wife on a daily basis?
I do.
Okay.
I'm out at client locations a lot, so there's a lot of space in between where we're not actually in the office together.
Okay. That's a whole nother episode we could record on.
Absolutely, yeah. It was rough in the beginning with the transition, and so I think we're finally finding our groove here.
Yeah. I worked with my wife on a daily basis for, at least a year, maybe a little longer. And it's wonderful. It's a different role that each of you plays, in the office versus home sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's definitely some learning that goes on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I may have missed I hired a virtual admin probably since we last spoke to help me on the EOS side of things, because I already had an administrative assistant for the TAB side of my business. Then I hired a part-time virtual admin for my EOS side.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you back on the show is that, in the last 130 episodes, I've interviewed a lot of people, and in a couple of those episodes, the theme came out of individuals wanting to become self-employed in larger numbers earlier than I realized. We had a couple professors come on the show and discuss a study they had done, and I think it was something like 22%. I should have looked at that before recording this, but somewhere in that range of students that were already, thinking about becoming self-employed. And these are individuals that hadn't even finished, their accounting degree yet, and they already had that as a plan. And and I don't know,
but maybe coming straight out of college, or going into public accounting first and then, or doing some kind of accounting-related job and then moving into entrepreneurship?
Well, some kind of accounting-related job, but they already had the plan of, becoming self-employed at some point. Yeah, not immediately necessarily. Although I've had more discussions like that as well, just on a personal basis with students that they have an idea, for a business. And I think maybe the entrepreneurial studies in colleges are promoting that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But, given your background being a business coach, I was curious, what insight you could give us on that. If I am about to get my accounting degree and I have an aspiration, whether it's now or later, of being my own boss. Maybe I'm first couple of years in my career, but I'm definitely early on. What do I need to know about starting a business that isn't necessarily obvious?
Yeah, no. When I first started my first business, the event management business, it was clear to me, and probably clear to all accountants, is that we're not natural business developers or networkers or salespeople. And so that would be one of my biggest aha moments, was that, when I started my first business is, how do I generate business? Business development aspect of things is just not natural to us. Although, I would say we're really good at, I think, relationships, because as an accountant, you kind of have to develop relationships either with your clients or with your peers in order to work with them, because you're asking for a lot of things from them. And so the big thing is, relationships matter. And so when you're really good at relationships, it helps when you are out on your own, because that's one of the things that I think a lot of accountants struggle with, is the business development aspect of things. Mm-hmm. And also one of the things is, maybe another thing I would say is, I was fortunate to be in audit when I started my accounting career, and so I got to learn about the whole business, because when you're in audit, you have to make sense of how those numbers get under the financial statements. And so you really need to understand the operations of that business. And so too many times, maybe accountants are too focused on the accounting side of things and not really understanding the business side of things. And so when they get into their own business, they're strong on the finance and accounting side of things, but operationally and also sales and marketing, they're not very strong at that.
How did you grow in that area? Was it just learning the hard way? Or
Which area? Business development or the learning the business?
Business development, those kinds of skills. Did you just pick them up along the way, or did you do anything to develop?
So when I first got my start in that first business, it was just learning through hard knocks on that one. And then my second stint, before that, so when I was wearing the hats of CFO, COO in the private companies, I had to manage salespeople, sales and marketing people. And so I had to wear that hat as well and really learn from them, but also coach them along. And I don't think I had any formal classes or anything like that, but I just really took the relationship side of things, because I'm a firm believer of more relationship sales and cold calling and hard sales approaches and things like that. So when I was wearing those hats in those private companies, I just kind of learned along the way as well.
Okay. I'm curious, would you classify yourself a little bit more on the introverted spectrum or extrovert?
When I look at my disc, if people are familiar with that, I'm pretty even across the board in that 50% range on all of 4 traits. So it seems like I'm kind of a chameleon. My wife tells me I'm conflicted and doesn't know what I want to be. But in my mind, I'm a little bit more balanced. I don't know if I would call myself an introvert or extrovert. I mean, there's certain times where I love being around people and I socialize all the time, and then there's other times where I just want to crawl into my cave and just be quiet and analyze and kind of reflect on things.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is, as of the time we're recording this episode hasn't come out, but by the time yours comes out, we will have had another one with a managing partner of a rather large accounting firm, and we get into the discussion of introverts a little bit, which I classify myself more on that side. And he makes a good point that some of the strengths are, you can develop deep relationships and you listen well and that kind of thing. And when you talk about business development, I think we as accountants don't think we're great at sales, but most of us are good at friendships and relationships.
Absolutely.
And it can be a strength being an introvert a little bit, and a good listener. So, yeah.
No, that's completely accurate, because, like I said, the relationships matter, and we're good relationship builders. Yep.
By the way, if you like to crawl in your cave occasionally, I think that means you're an introvert. That's how you're recharging.
You're right.
Back to the starting the business, for individuals that would be starting a new business or thinking about that, what are some of the unexpected surprises or pitfalls that they should be aware of that we don't realize are coming? What are some of the mistakes you see early entrepreneurs make?
Especially accountants or anyone that's really an expert in a specific trade. They know their trade really well. They know their expertise really well, but they don't know the business side of things really well. And so that's where obviously they start a business because they're really good at what they do. But then once they start running a business, it's the business aspect of things that they're kind of lost in. They can survive for a few years doing that. Then once they're not, honing their business skills, long term, the company really suffers if they're just a technician the whole time. And they do want to grow and lead a company to newer levels. They have to really understand the business side of things more than their trade. So that's one thing. And also another thing is, as they grow, they need to develop themselves as a leader, because if they're expecting their employees to lead when they themselves are not leading, I see that all the time, and that's how I do work with them, and that's how they really come into the TAB system, is because they know they have gaps in their leadership, and they could be doing so much better in leading their organization, but they're not. And so they're so frustrated with their employees, but they're not leading by example. So that's another thing. And I would say those are probably the two big things that I see all the time.
Are there any books you'd recommend if somebody wanted to sort of self-develop in those areas?
Yeah, there's a lot of books out there, but the ones that we use a lot in either TAB or EOS is, we talk about developing systems, and you probably heard this. I know you've heard this one. It's called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and it starts with the story of a baker that's always making the pies. And, all of a sudden she's growing more and she's still making the pies, and then she can't grow anymore because she's the only one that's making the pies, so she starts developing these systems. And it's all about really creating a model, a franchise model, if you will, that even if you're not franchising your business, you're operating your business in a way that it is a franchise that's repeatable, is scalable, so that you're not the only one doing all the work. So that's one of the great books out there that helps with really knowing how to run the business and scale a business. In terms of leadership, there's a lot of business books out there as well. We use a lot of Pat Lencioni books. So The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team talks about having a really highly functional team building on the foundation of trust. So I would recommend that. Another one's called How to Be a Great Boss, and that's by Gino Wickman, and co-author Renee Bohr is a co-author there. That's a great book too, and it boils it down to 5 key things as a leader, 5 key things as a manager, and if you do that, then accountability will result. So it's a formula for them. Leadership plus management equals accountability. So those would be the books I would recommend in those areas. You kind of mentioned about some surprises there, so let me touch on that. One of the surprises I hear or see is that, if they're really good in their trade and they've developed the relationships, they have that fear, right, of stepping out onto their own. But once they do, if they have those 2 things, they're really good at their trade and they've developed the relationships, how easy it is to get the first new clients. And that's how businesses actually start, because they hang their shingle and they have their existing relationships and people know them, and so they want to do business with them. So they get their first new clients pretty easily. But then as they grow, how hard it is to balance working in the business versus on the business and staying profitable, because that's one of the main challenges in obviously sustaining your business, staying profitable, because you can grow too much and you're just working more and more and the profits are not increasing, and you're just taking on more business without growing your profits. That leads to burnout.
For accountants, is that usually a pricing issue?
It is, and learning to say no to things that probably doesn't fit in their sweet spot or in their model. And it's not just accountants, it's any business. You want to please everyone in the beginning and take on everything that you think you can do. And so you become a generalist, and then once you really start finding your sweet spot, your core focus, then you start focusing on those. And that's where you really add value to your clients and your companies, when you find a niche. Much like you. You found your niche, and you do great in your niche, Mark. You focus on accountants. And you had to transition from a journalist to focusing on that. You know how that goes.
Well, thank you. It's not about me, Don. It's about you. But thank you.
But it's very relevant across everyone.
Something I've seen in the accounting profession, because we tend to be, careful, cautious individuals. We like to, make sure we understand the risk and that kind of thing. If I'm thinking about starting my own business of some kind, and I'm an accountant, it's nice to know what successful people have in common, and judge myself against that. Are there any common traits you see among the successful business owners, that you work with? Anything that's sort of a theme?
Yeah, there's so many personalities that I work with. And, one of the things that I think is common across all of them, and they've written books on this, and they call it grit, right? Grit and perseverance. It's just their ability to overcome obstacles. Regardless of what comes up in front of them. I hear all sorts of stories, and that's what I love about working with entrepreneurs is, they could be on the verge of bankruptcy, on their last dime, or they're just about to give up, but it's that grit and perseverance, knowing that, they can overcome it. And they do. I just signed up a new client yesterday. She had an amazing story. So she started her business in 2014, and she moved from another part of the state. And so she started from scratch with no connections here, started a practice, and then, maybe months into it, she got really discouraged and she just wanted to quit and move back. But then she decided to stick it out. And she started in 2014. Now she's a $4 million business with 4 locations.
Oh my gosh.
That's just 5 years from now.
Wow.
She had that grit and perseverance, and she overcame the obstacles. And I hear that story all the time, and that's really what amazes me about entrepreneurs is that I think that would be that one factor that I think all of them have, the successful ones. Because the other ones, they quit, or they just go back to their comfort level. You're not always in your comfort level when you're an entrepreneur.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to ask you, in my own life, my own career, I've had my businesses now for over a decade, but before that, I was employed and a partner somewhere, and then back to being employed by a company, and then later started the business. And I remember in between there, while I was employed, that there were some nice things about just being employed by somebody and you're not having to worry about some of the other issues.
Right.
It's almost like renting a house. If something breaks, well, you don't have to fix it, or always, someone else does, or maybe that's why I equated it too. Because I think sometimes people think that, the ultimate goal is, be your own boss, and it's not all pretty.
Yep.
Is there any time that you think maybe it's better to just have a job you love versus being self-employed, or maybe a certain type of personality that's better for, or a situation? I mean, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, early on, you always question yourself when you're starting your business, right? And whether or not you're doing the right thing, and whether or not, you should just get a job. But then again, that's when that grit kicks in. When you're down and you feel like, man, why am I doing this? Should I just get a job? If you're truly an entrepreneur and you're wired that way and you want to serve people and you think you can do it better than some other folks and you feel like you do add value to your clients and you have a bigger purpose, it's just that grit kicks in. And that's what makes the entrepreneur really successful. And you realize that, I would be horrible at a job. I mean, you and I, Mark, I've been over 10 years in our business. Well, it'll be my 10th year this year. We're pretty much unemployable. No one can employ us anymore because we don't want to work for anyone else, because we have that grit to keep it going and make sure that we help others, our employees, in helping really just the marketplace. So I think, once you get that taste of entrepreneurship, what I see is you rarely go back unless you really aren't wired that way. If you don't have that grit, then you're not wired that way.
Okay. Grit. I love that. I didn't see that coming out as a theme originally, and that's great. I'm glad we got down to that point. We did get a lot deeper in this episode.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
You know what I'm talking about, Mark. You have that grit. I mean, you've had those times where you've been up and down, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I had an early business coach in the early days that I was complaining about something, a difficult time, and she's just looking at me, and finally she goes, well, have you been through this before? Yes. Well, and you got through it? Yes. Okay, well, then you're going to get through it, so why are you whining? I guess I wasn't as gritty that day, but... Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you. And I agree, by the way. I think I'm unemployable at this point also.
Yeah. We make horrible employees.
Well, before we get to the final questions, I did want to ask you about the future of JDSM Enterprises. I mean, what are your goals for the next few years? What does success look like if it goes the way you'd like it to? I'm really blessed where we're at right now, and we can go in all sorts of different directions. The three things I'm really focused on right now is first re-energizing TAB, as I mentioned before. So that's why we hired a business development person, and we're already making gains on that. So continue to grow the TAB business. And then finding a model to scale EOS. And that's where, because I'm the only certified EOS implementer here in town in San Antonio, and I think I know one just recently went through the boot camp training, and another one, actually a client of mine, is going to go through in August, and so we're increasing, and I believe my wife is interested. We're looking at positioning her to be the EOS implementer for professional services and the medical markets, because that's what her background is. So it's really trying to scale EOS. The third component, too, is, and it really dovetails into what I do with TAB and EOS, is that, and it might be going back to my event management days, is I want to start creating and hosting and developing leadership conferences, because I just love developing leaders. And we have events. We have some small events here and there for TAB and EOS and for business development purposes, some educational events, but I want to make it a larger scale and inviting speakers and really developing the content. So it's one of my passions. And so that's where I see really JDSM going, is re-energizing TAB, scaling the EOS model,
and getting into leadership conferences.
Sounds like a good plan to me. I can tell you really enjoy, what you do. And I think the leadership conferences dovetails into that real well, because that's the strength of yours, the coaching, definitely.
Thank you. No, glad you're affirming it.
Well, the final 3 questions I end every podcast with have changed a little bit since we started. I'm not even sure I did them on the first podcast, to be perfectly honest. They're an early situation, but we've changed them up a little bit. So I wanted to go through those again, even if I did them with you originally.
Okay.
The first one's usually the easiest for guests. From a career perspective, what's been your proudest moment?
Probably has changed since then. And I don't even remember what I said back then. But I guess since then, it's taken this other leap and becoming an EOS implementer, because it has really changed my business model and it has allowed me to work with the leadership teams of the target market that I work with already, the small business owners and small and mid-sized businesses that are locally owned here in San Antonio. Because with TAB, I was working strictly with the owner. And part of my strategy was I knew that even just working with the owner, they were going to have a hard time implementing strategy throughout the whole entire organization. And that's where EOS comes in, because I work with the leadership team. So I get a layer below the owner and really working with the leadership team and having them help implement strategy across the organization. So I think with that move, and it was an investment, I had to invest some training time and really shifting my company in order for me to do that. But I think that's, since the last time we spoke, that would probably my proudest moment now, because I feel like that has made a major change in my business. Yeah,
I mean, your revenue split now is obviously it's been a successful change. From 75-25 to 25-75, yes. And the one didn't shrink. That's wow, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, second question, and the more details you give us on this, the more we can learn. But tell us about a lesson you learned the hard way.
This is probably more recent. The lesson I learned the hard way was, so as I mentioned, my wife joined the business, and I had all these plans of onboarding her, right? I had an onboarding plan, timeline, and all this. And usually I'm pretty good about implementing my plans, but this time not so much. So I just kind of threw her into the fire. Even though I had the plan, I didn't follow it. And so I got busy and serving clients, and I just figured, she can figure it out. She's smart. And she is smart, but, I speak a different language in this industry from where she came from in medical. And she was, running an organization, multi-million-dollar business with several employees. And now, we're a small team, so that's a different transition. So I just didn't really onboard her well. And it was a struggle, as you would know, working with your wife, not just on the business side of things. It impacted us on the personal side as well. So that would be one of the things that, I learned the hard way, is that I needed to, especially when it's your wife, and you really have to invest the time and energy to do that right. Otherwise, you are going to be kind of redoing things or undoing things, and it affects your relationship. And that's probably why, and I see it with my clients all the time, is they expect their employees to just ramp up really quickly, but they don't have an onboarding process to get them to where they want to get them. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people leave because they weren't onboarded very well. Luckily, my wife and I kind of have gone through that process already, and she's not going to leave, so.
Well, for what it's worth, you are an organized, methodical guy, because I think most people would not have any kind of formal onboarding plan, bringing on someone that they know that well, a spouse or a close family member, and to even prepare to that, even though you weren't able to execute it, the way you thought, even to plan to that point, that's pretty remarkable.
Really what's sad is, I did it with my facilitators, so when they transitioned to taking over some of my groups, I had an onboarding process for them. I had an onboarding process for my executive admins. I just took advantage that she was my wife and figured, she can figure it out. And so that was the wrong approach to it.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that's very personal, too. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I don't want others to fall into that trap.
Perfect. Well, last question, and then we'll go ahead and close it down. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
That's a big one. So I would probably have to say, and this has probably come from a lot of people, whether it's my father, seeing him kind of build his business, moving us from the Philippines to here in the U.S., to all the different mentors I've had along the way, to the clients that I work with, hearing them say it, The advice I would say is, always learn. Don't stop learning. And that's when we stop learning, is when we stop growing our minds, is when we stop developing into better people. We start making mistakes, and we're not our best version of ourselves when we stop learning. And the other part of it is also just do your best wherever you are. That's kind of what led me to my career and what I do now, and I feel like I'm really good at what I do, and I feel like I serve my clients well. It's because I learned a lot of things along the way, and I did my best wherever I was in any part of my career, which opened up a lot of doors. And I feel like, God led me to what I'm doing now based on what I did in the past. And so that'd be the two things I would say is the best advice I ever got was always learn and do the best wherever you are.
Wonderful. Well, that really is perfect to end this on. And Don, thank you for coming back. I talked about, doing repeat shows and having a repeat guest, and that's very assumptive on my part that someone would actually want to come back and be a guest a second time. So thank you for saying yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was very honored, first of all, that I was your first guest, and now I'm like, how many episodes have you done now?
Over 130.
That's awesome.
Well,
so
thank you.
So I appreciate being invited back. Sometimes, you can forget the little people when you get that big. So thanks for not forgetting me.
I think it's actually the reverse. I'm the little people, but you're welcome. Thank you. Well, wonderful. This has been great. For the audience, this has been Life in Accounting. We are a podcast production of WhereAccountants.go.com. If you haven't yet come to the website, please do. We have a tremendous amount of accounting career content there for you. Plus, we always list a few related episodes that may interest you as well if you've enjoyed this episode with Don. It's all on our show notes page. Our website is www.whereaccountantsgo.com. Well, Don, if someone wanted to find out more about EOS or TAB or your consulting services, your coaching services, what's the best way to find out more about you? Where can they go?
The best way is probably our website. So it's jdsmenterprises.com. Or if that's too hard to remember, traction2healthy.com. All words, no spaces, traction2healthy.com. Because what we say is we help develop healthy businesses.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you to the audience for joining us for another week. We appreciate you. We will see everyone next week. There's more to come.